Hey, John here. Just wanted to comment on the Syrian Refugee Crisis issue, and most notably the responses I've seen on social media from more than a few young evangelicals on this topic, and their desire to support Obama's plan of introducing 10,000 in the first wave Syrian refugees at the expense of the taxpayers. One of the things I've noticed about the evangelical support for this is that those who disagree tend, not in all cases, but in many, to be deemed intolerant, bigoted, prejudiced, unloving, uncaring, and all those types of labels. Since I find myself in the group of evangelicals who would oppose the introduction of 10,000 and probably more Syrian immigrants at this time, I would like to explain myself and hopefully give some Christians out there the opportunity to understand the other side of this in a respectful tone. I want to be humble about this. I've listened to what others have posted on social media. I've at least read it. And I hope I am treated in the same charitable way. I don't mean to demean. I do believe that there is a heart of compassion, and I don't doubt the sincerity with which young evangelicals want to help the Syrian refugees. But I don't know if they're thinking about this from the vantage point of a Christian worldview. And there's two things that concern me. Number one is secularization. It seems to me that some young evangelicals may have secular worldviews, though they may be saved, with a Christian veneer kind of put on. In other words, they're not operating from a Christian worldview, they're operating from a secular worldview, where human rights and compassion and all these things are kind of the meaning imposed on them by Christianity, or I should say, the meaning that originally came from Christianity now has a different meaning imposed on it from a secular humanist standpoint. And I do see that as a possibility as to why young evangelicals are reacting the way they are. And another possibility is there's ignorance, and it could be a combination of what the Christian worldview actually teaches about this. And so I'd like to maybe give my opinion and what I believe the biblical worldview response should be to the question of, do we import, at the expense of taxpayers, Syrian refugees at this point in time, especially after the Paris attacks last week? So, Relevant Magazine had an article, I think it was on Monday that I saw it, where they address this, and they kind of use passages in the New Testament from the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says to treat people, your neighbor with respect and your enemy with respect, and passages from the Old Testament where Israel is supposed to treat the sojourner among them with respect. And they say that, well, because of these, we should support the government plan to introduce Syrian refugees into our culture. And my concern, my sadness really on this is over the fact that there are Christians out there that don't seem to be able to, or have never been taught to, operate from a Christian worldview on this. And so I want to, if I can, offer some help, and if you're willing to listen to me, if you fall into that category, just hang on and I will explain what I mean by that. In a Christian worldview, we got different spheres of authority, and I want to give an example to illustrate this. If you have children, your children are to be disciplined, fed, nurtured, loved. That command is not given to the government, it's not given to the church, it's given to you, the parent, it's given to the family. Families are to be a ministry of education, to raise up children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. In the same way, the government is responsible to protect its citizens. It has a ministry of justice to punish evildoers. Romans 13 talks about this. In the same way, the church has a ministry of grace, whereby church discipline is carried out, and encouragement is offered, and worship takes place, and shepherds watch over the sheep. So, Christian instruction is done there. Christian justice should be done in the government, and Christian education in the family. three different spheres of authority, three different institutions in society, all responsible before God for His law, all having different sort of spheres of authority in which they act. So the question should be, the Syrian refugee issue, what sphere of authority are we talking about when we talk about this issue? And how does the ministry relegated to that sphere apply in the situation? Well, obviously the government has an involvement here, and their involvement is spending taxpayer money to bring the Syrian refugees over here, put them on any form of assistance while they're trying to get them jobs and all of that. And so the government has a stake in this. Now, the government's responsibility it has is to protect its people, to make sure that evildoers do not impose their evil on them. The responsibility is not to the community of the world, it's not to the people of Syria, it's to the people of the United States. Well, the people of the United States are not safer for bringing Syrian refugees over here. And I believe I can substantiate this. The terrorist attack last week should speak for itself. The UN supposedly vetted the terrorists that carried out what they did in Paris, and just yesterday there was a female terrorist. It doesn't seem to be distinguishable between male and female as to their involvement, but a female terrorist exploded herself also in France, and so she was a suicide bomber. We see that these people cannot be properly vetted, and that is a big issue. In Germany, we're having a skyrocket epidemic of rapes and murders and crime because of the Syrian refugee issue. And so, to subject that on Americans is probably not the best idea. That doesn't mean that every single Syrian refugee is by nature an ISIS member, but ISIS members have infiltrated, and just in the past 3 days, there have been 3 separate occasions, 16 different people, Syrians, who have tried to get into this country with fake passports, so forth and so on. There's other places they can go, but they're trying to get here. And it's just, it's very intriguing. ISIS has even said that they've infiltrated the refugee group. If you look at the things the refugees themselves have been saying in interviews, they are looking to culturally overtake Europe and use force, some of them at least, when necessary. So it's not exactly a safe thing because we just don't know which ones are the more fundamentalist elements that take their Quran seriously and which ones are more moderate, or which ones I should say take their Quran less seriously. So in this unspecified group of people, you have people that pose a threat to American citizens. So it's probably not a great idea. The CIA themselves have said we can't fully vet these people in the amount of time Obama's trying to push this thing through. So they're unvetted. Another thing I'd like to point out, and this isn't really getting any major media play. I know Chris Matthews, surprisingly, a liberal commentator, had something on this the other day, but there are 4 million Syrian refugees, and there are only 4 that we can find that we've trained to fight ISIS. Now think about this for a minute. Most of the Syrian refugees are men. Throughout Europe, it has been observed that predominantly it is young males of the marrying age, the soldier age actually too, military age, who are coming into Europe. Now, if we've only been able to train 4, and there's 4 million, that means 1 in every million is willing to fight for Syria. Now the Kurds are still up there. They're in the northern part of Syria. They're fighting. They're hanging on. They're, trying to fight for their homeland. But these refugees seem like they don't care about their country. They're abandoning ship. Meanwhile, we have American blood being spilled over there, and they're not willing to spill their own blood. Why in the world should we care about Syria if they don't care about Syria themselves? What does that say about their character? What does that say about men who leave, especially the ones who leave their sisters and mothers and so forth and so on, and defenseless? There's something wrong with this picture. So we have people whose character is, as a group, I'm not saying every single individual in it, but as a group, there are enough people that who have kind of spurious characters, at least characters that we should be doubting, that it is an unsafe thing for the government, whose responsibility it is to protect its citizens, to allow them to come in. This is from the Christian worldview. So So that's the government. What about the church? Well, the church has responsibility to administer the gospel, the sacraments, if you want to go with that word, helping the poor. Individual Christians have that responsibility as well. So when they come here, which they probably will, yeah, absolutely. I want to be compassionate. I want the church to get involved in helping as much as possible. We should absolutely be doing that. But we got to separate the responsibilities the government has with the responsibilities that the church has. I think that's a very important thing to do. And that's where the article in Relevant magazine was wrong, because they took questions or verses that had to do with personal jurisdiction from the New Testament and applied it to the government. They don't apply. Secondly, when you think about the sojourner in the land of Israel, the sojourner was sojourning. We weren't, the Israelites weren't going almost 7,000 miles away to import people with a different culture that would undermine the Constitution, which most of these Muslims would. I just say that because there is a majority of Muslims in the United States that support Sharia law, and there's a sizable minority within the refugee group, according to some polls that have said that they actually even stand with ISIS. So you have enough people that would undermine our Constitution that would be coming in. And that wasn't the situation in ancient Israel. The sojourner did not have all the rights, privileges of being an Israelite. If they wanted to assimilate into Israel, they had to become a proselyte. And that is worth noting. Another thing worth noting is the actions Israel was to take towards the nations around them that worshiped false gods. If you want to create a parallel, these Syrian refugees would actually be closer to the nations surrounding Israel that Israel was not allowed to intermarry with, was not allowed to worship with. And there was a very clear separation that went on there. When it comes to the sojourners, really what the Bible is saying is don't enslave them. When they come to you, don't enslave them. That's the big... So as long as... I haven't heard anyone advocate, let's enslave the Syrians. So we need to take things in context. And for those that are supporting the application of Old Testament law to a modern situation, I would note, if we want to apply it consistently, you would need to apply the civil penalties for actions such as homosexuality, adultery, etc. And most young evangelicals aren't willing to do that. And so it just seems interesting to me that all of a sudden we should be applying the Old Testament when they wouldn't, by and large, support other Old Testament laws in the civil government. So I think that if you're a part of this group that wants to bring the refugees in and you're using these arguments, then you need to think through it a little bit more. I want to just go over what I think true compassion would be in this situation. We have the possibility of creating a safe zone in Syria. That idea has been floated, where we could keep the Syrians safe, who want to be safe, train the men to fight and take their country back, and they're not threatening American citizens. Of course, taxpayers are still being used to pay for this, but I think most taxpayers would prefer that over bringing them here and having them be a threat in our country. We need to have compassion for the girls in Germany who are being raped and the school kids who are being bullied by refugees from other places, including Syria. We need to have compassion on the victims of the terrorist attack that happened in France last week and the possible victims that we would have in our country. We need to have compassion on the troops who are overseas spilling their own blood when the members of the refugee group aren't willing to spill their blood for their country. To me, that is an absolute disgrace. So compassion cuts both ways. And while I do want to have compassion, I do have compassion on those who are children especially, but who are legitimately have lost everything and want a place to flee. I have to also keep in mind the Christian worldview when it comes to government responsibility and the different groups of people at play in this whole situation. I think there are better solutions, more compassionate solutions, than Obama's solution of importing in the first wave 10,000 immigrants and then importing more after that. I do want to say in closing that I believe we should be able to, as Christians especially, with people who we disagree with, respectfully disagree and have a cordial, nice Christian discussion that seeks to understand the other side without name-calling. There's no need to call someone who believes what I believe intolerant, bigoted, anything of the kind, unloving, uncharitable. I don't call people who believes we should take the refugees over here any of those names either. The most I've said is I think there may be an ignorance, and I've even said maybe. I think there may be a secularization going on. It seems like it's one of those two. I only see two options there, or a combination of them. But I am listening. I'm trying to be humble towards that approach, and I want to genuinely understand. And I hope the same respect is afforded me as you watch this video. If you're in this group of evangelicals who believes it's a compassionate thing to bring the Syrians over here at this time, really think about what I'm saying, and think about the Christian worldview. Think about what it would say, and you know, try to avoid taking verses out of context. If you agree with me that is the case, that is what's being done right now. So thank you for listening to me, and hope you have a great rest of the week.